Hey everyone, and welcome to this Explainer. Today we're going to unpack a truly fascinating chapter of history, heavily drawing on the World History Encyclopedia's deep dive into the Third Intermediate Period of Egypt. I'm absolutely thrilled to share this with you today, mainly because history is so often written by those completely obsessed with centralized power, and that bias has led to some really massive misunderstandings. For decades, we've been told that the era right after Egypt's New Kingdom was just this chaotic, crumbling dark age, but honestly, the reality is an incredibly gripping story of divided power, foreign invaders who actually wound up saving the culture, and an empire that ultimately weaponized its own beliefs against itself.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty of politics and pharaohs, I want to plant a wonderfully bizarre historical question in your mind. How did a love of cats doom ancient Egypt? Just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer. I promise you, there is a massive payoff to this question by the end of our journey today, and it involves literally one of the most absurd yet brilliantly tragic military strategies in all of ancient history.
Okay, let's jump right in and quickly define our terms. In Egyptian history, a kingdom usually refers to an era of strong, centralized government. An intermediate period, on the other hand, just means a time of disunity and divided rule. Now, 20th century historians who were heavily biased toward strong central authorities looked at this third intermediate period, which ran from around 1069 to 525 BCE, and basically slapped a Dark Age label on it. They just kind of assumed that because the government was decentralized, society itself must have been in total chaos and collapse.
But that simply isn't true. As Egyptologist John Taylor points out, the period as a whole was stable and represents far more than a temporary lapse from traditional pharaonic rule. And this quote right here completely debunks that whole Dark Age myth. Sure, there were tensions, but violence definitely wasn't endemic. Rather than a total collapse of civilization, this era was actually defined by incredible cultural resilience. The art, the religious practices, the ancient customs of Egypt, they all survived, just without a unifying central government. So you might be wondering, if there wasn't one central king ruling the whole shebang, how did the country actually function?
Well, let's explore that in Section 1, A Tale of Two Cities.
Basically, the power vacuum was filled by two totally different systems of government operating at the exact same time. Up north in Lower Egypt, we have the city of Tanis. This was the seat of secular rule. And just for context, in ancient Egypt, secular really just meant pragmatic rule, meaning kings were making decisions based on actual circumstances and taking responsibility for them. But down south in Upper Egypt, we have Thebes, and Thebes was a strict theocracy. The high priest there didn't just consult the god Amun. Amun was considered the literal king. Decisions of state, civic cases, domestic issues, they were all decided by the god communicating directly through oracles. Now, you'd probably think this profound ideological and geographical split would just lead to endless bloody civil war. Yet, incredibly, they coexisted with remarkable tolerance. We actually have evidence of shared inscriptions and joint building projects between the two. The ruling house is frequently intermarried, and most crucially, they shared a tremendously powerful and wealthy position known as the god's wife of Amun. This role was actually held by daughters from the rulers of both Tanis and Thebes at various times. So the secular and religious powers basically recognized each other's legitimacy without tearing the country apart.
Which brings us to Section 2, Enter the Foreign Pharaohs.
Here's the catch, though. A decentralized nation is inherently a vulnerable nation, and Egypt pretty quickly became a revolving door for foreign powers. While Tanis and Thebes were playing nice internally, they completely failed to exert significant influence over the whole country or secure its borders. So first up, during the 21st and 22nd dynasties, Libyan rulers take power. Then, as Egypt splintered even further, the Kushites from down south swept in to establish the 24th and 25th dynasties. And finally, this all culminated in devastating Assyrian invasions from the Near East in 671 and 666 BCE.
But wait, there is a massive twist to this era of foreign invasion. These were actually the invaders who preserved Egypt. It's an incredible irony, really. Instead of marching in and wiping out Egyptian culture, invaders like the Libyans and the Kushites absolutely admired it, they adopted it, and they went to extraordinary lengths to preserve it. They didn't want to destroy Egypt, they literally wanted to be Egyptian.
In fact, these foreign rulers often acted exactly like traditional pharaohs. The Libyan king Shoshenq I managed to reunify the country and completely revitalize the economy through military campaigns. Later on, the Kushite king Kashta saw Egypt's weakness. But rather than launching a bloody siege, he just peacefully took control of Upper Egypt by having his daughter appointed to that incredibly powerful role we talked about earlier, the god's wife of Amun. And his successor, King Shabaka, he funded massive building projects and preserved historical documents all over Egypt. They actively protected the legacy.
Moving right along to Section 3, Revival under the Sayites.
Of course, this protective era couldn't last forever. And the really crucial point here is that Egypt accidentally orchestrated its own vulnerability, and the geopolitical squeeze finally caught up with them. Remember the Libyan king Shoshenq I and his super successful military campaigns? Well, he conquered regions like Judah and Israel. While that was hugely celebrated at the time, it accidentally removed vital buffer zones between Egypt and the aggressively expanding Assyrian Empire. Without that buffer, the Assyrians just marched right up to the border and easily invaded in 671 and 666 BCE. They drove out the Kushites and installed a puppet king named Necho I. Egypt was now firmly under the thumb of a pretty brutal foreign empire.
But the Assyrians made a fatal miscalculation. They left that puppet king's son, Psammetichus I, in charge. Psammetichus was smart. He pretended to abide by all the Assyrian policies while quietly plotting to overthrow them. He eventually expelled the Assyrians entirely, reunited Egypt, and sparked the 26th dynasty, a golden renaissance ruled from the northern city of Sais.
And this immense prosperity is exactly what definitively proves why calling this era a Dark Age is so totally inaccurate. Psammetichus I restored monuments and traditional royal art. His son, Necho II, recognized that Egyptians honestly weren't great seafarers, so he pragmatically hired Greek mercenaries to build a highly effective, powerful navy. And later, Amasis II oversaw a massive economic and artistic boom. We're talking secure borders, thriving trade, and stunning artwork in bronze, silver, and gold being produced.
Which brings us to our final act, Section 4, the Persian Cat Conquest.
So this huge renaissance ultimately sets the stage for our bizarre and tragic climax. It's finally time to answer that hook from the very beginning of the explainer. It all kicks off with what historians call the fake wife insult. The Persian king Cambyses II sent a message to the Egyptian pharaoh Amasis, basically asking for one of his daughters as a wife. Now, Amasis didn't want to send his actual daughter to a foreign king, but he also really didn't want a war, so he thought he was being clever. He sent the daughter of the previous pharaoh instead. But when this princess arrived at the Persian court, she was deeply insulted by the whole thing and immediately revealed her true identity. Cambyses II was absolutely furious at being sent a fake wife and swore revenge. He mobilized the Persian army and marched right on Egypt in 525 BCE. The two massive armies met at the city of Pelusium. Initially, the Egyptians fought hard and drove the Persians back. But then, Cambyses II formulated literally one of the strangest military tactics in human history. Step 1. He had noticed the intense Egyptian reverence for animals, particularly cats, and their hugely popular feline goddess Bastet. Step 2. He ordered his soldiers to paint images of cats on their shields, and then they just rounded up all the stray and wild animals, especially cats, they could possibly find. Step 3. The Persian army literally drove these live animals right in front of them as they marched against the walls of Pelusium.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates the weaponization of a culture against itself. The Egyptians were utterly terrified. And the crazy thing is, they weren't afraid of the Persian soldiers. They were terrified of accidentally hurting the sacred animals or enraging their goddess Bastet. Completely paralyzed by their own religious devotion, the Egyptians just refused to fire their arrows. They surrendered the city and effectively handed over their entire empire.
The aftermath is both profoundly tragic and just absurd. The ancient historian Herodotus relays this unforgettable anecdote. Cambyses II is said to have ordered a triumphal march, hurling cats from a bag into the Egyptians' faces in contempt. It's just wild to picture. He captured the pharaoh, executed thousands, and brought the 26th dynasty to a violent end. Except for a few brief rebellions, Egypt permanently ceased to be an autonomous nation, passing from the Persians to Alexander the Great and eventually right to Rome.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question to think about. After surviving centuries of internal division, intense political fracturing, and multiple foreign invaders, was it Egypt's own cultural reverence that ultimately brought down the empire? It's a striking historical irony that the very beliefs that sustained their society through this so-called Dark Age were exactly what their enemies weaponized to finally break them. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structured look at the Third Intermediate Period has completely changed how you view this incredibly complex, fun, and totally fascinating era of Egyptian history.